Are we really the most affected? Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Fernanda Pradesquerra, and I am in the third semester of high school at UVM Campus Querétaro. Today, I am going to talk about a very important topic, especially nowadays. I am talking about one of the biggest pandemics of all time, COVID-19 or coronavirus, and its impact over the environment. The coronavirus or COVID-19 pandemic is a defining global health crisis of our time and the greatest challenge we have faced since World War II. Since its emergence in Asia late last year, the virus has spread to every continent except Antarctica. We have now reached millions of deaths, and the human family is suffering under an almost intolerable burden of loss. This pandemic is much more than a health crisis, it's also an unprecedented socio-economic crisis. Stressing every one of the countries it touches, it has the potential to create devastating social, economic, and political effects that will leave long-standing scars. Every day, people are losing jobs and income with no way of knowing when we normally will return. Due to this pandemic, we're no longer allowed to go to school, hang with our friends, or even getting to see our relatives and our loved ones. But today, I'm going to centrally talk about one of the effects that not so much people care about, which is the environmental effects that COVID-19 has occasioned and how this is going to affect to our normal way of life. There are already some voices that are raised trying to relate the pandemic to the climate change. But this relationship may not be so much in the origin, but in the final outcome. We live in a unusual situation and with many doubts regarding the virus that has put the whole world in check and that moreover surprises with unexpected environmental consequences. The isolation orders in most of the world and the paralysis of industrial activity, as well as the reduction of the displacement, have returned to the main cities of the world, their blue skies, and reduced the level of pollution. Of course, the coronavirus, in addition to being a threat to public health, is becoming a real threat to the environment if it's not acted on time and with responsibility. No war, no recession, no other pandemic has had such a dramatic impact on CO2 emissions over the last century as COVID-19 has achieved in just a few months. Matt McGrath, an environment correspondent for the United States, wrote for BBC. There are fewer planes in the skies and fewer cars on the tracks. Power consumption has dropped. NASA has detected the decrease in polluting gases in the atmosphere from space. Seismologists have noticed that the planet is vibrating even less. Images of waters that look more crystalline and animals that now walk happily through cities without humans around them are circulating on social networks. COVID-19 in no way has a positive side for the environment, Engineer Anderson, director of the United States Environmental Program, said. The visible positive impacts, whether it be improved air quality or reduced greenhouse emissions, are only temporary, as they are due to the tragic economic slowdown and human suffering, Anderson said. What relief is the planet receiving and what can be expected as humanity tries to return to normal after the pandemic? Various analyses indicate that we're experiencing an unprecedented drop of the emission of CO2, one of the main polluting gases that cause climate change. We are facing the threat of extinction and people do not even know it. In the last 100 years, several crises have meant a reduction to CO2 emissions derived from the use of oil, gas, and coal. This was the case during the Spanish flu epidemic, the Great Depression, and the end of the World War II. The strongest fall, however, has been caused by the coronavirus in just a few months. Are we going to a greener planet? In some countries, initiatives in favor of the environment driven by the coronavirus have already begun to be seen. In Paris, for example, 650 kilometers of crown bike paths are being set up. An ambitious plan to reduce car use and prioritize pedestrians and cyclists was announced in Milan in the response to crisis caused by the virus. The oil crisis could also drive change. Oil prices have plummeted, and that has a huge impact. There are legitimate questions about whether that industry will ever recover. Robert Kaufman, director of the Energy and Environment Program at Boston University and a specialist in the oil market, tells BBC World. Temporary relief. The respite in the planet is experiencing is temporary, experts warn. To achieve a notable decrease in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, a sustained reduction of 10% globally in the use of fossil fuels should be achieved for 1 year. According to the Scripps Institute of Oceanography at the University of San Diego, USA. NASA cautions that the decreases in emissions of gases such as CO2 would need to occur over a long sustained period of time in order to have an immeasurable impact on the climate. When the economy reopens, it is likely that we return to the practice we had before. For this reason, the effect of the coronavirus on the planet depends on the decisions taken when we overcoming the health crisis. Any positive environmental impact arising from this aberrant pandemic must be a shift in our production and consumption habits toward a cleaner and greener environment, says Anderson for the United Nations. The pandemic is showing us an alternative ways of doing things. Which of them are we going to adapt in a post-pandemic world? It all depends on what we learned during the pandemic that forces us to change our behaviors. Although the effects of the coronavirus are for many more evident at this time than those of climate change, experts say that because of the pandemic, the environment should not be neglected. The climate crisis will not give you the opportunity to stay in home for 2 months and then go back to normal. When the climate crisis arrives, it will be more severe, and you're not going to solve it overnight with a wonderful vaccine. There is no magic cure for climate change, Professor Kaufman said. In conclusion, we must all be aware while we're damaging the environment, even when using 1, 2, and then 4 masks and then throwing them to the trash. We must understand that returning will be even more difficult than what we have in mind, and we have to be prepared. Maybe the vaccine for this illness works, but what if we want to return to normality and the earth is more contaminated than what we ever think? For us and for our planet, we have to change. Thank you very much for your attention, and remember to keep safe.